7 commandments. First thing, listen actively. What means to listen actively? So the interviewer is going to say, okay, now let's do a case. And they're going to say, your client is Coke or is GM. And they have been having this and that problem. Profitability has gone down 15%. You're not expected to just sit and look at him or her. You should be noting down things. You should be already thinking, what kind of problem is that? You have to be really fast. So it's all about speed and accuracy. So you have to listen actively, fully concentrate. Something that helped me is before the case started or the interview started, there's a lot of them. I always try to think about questions you ask in the most important framework. So you should always think of segmenting the customers. You should always think of asking how the competitive landscape is. Is it fragmented? Is it a monopoly? So get inside the case before the interview starts. Helps a lot to concentrate. As I said, note down information. So after the interviewer says what the problem is, pause and repeat the problem with other words. So you shouldn't repeat exactly what he said, because you would sound like a robot, but try to say like, okay, so just to make sure I got the problem, our client is the CEO of Coke, and it seems that they're having 5% of decline in their profits. Is that it? Is that correct? The interviewer's going to say, yeah. So, and you can also ask questions. If you don't know what Coke is, yes. What's Coke? That one I wouldn't ask, but if they ask about something about the financial market, bonds or loans, you're not obliged to know everything about every industry. You need to be able to ask if you don't know something. Something good to do is double check the objective. So, is the objective only to increase profits, or should we also increase it by 15%? So, this is something is nice to ask at the beginning because it might save you a lot of time. If you know everything you need to do from the start, again, ask questions to make sure you understood the problem. Now, the third commandment is just to make sure you got it. So first is listen and then rephrase. After you rephrase and you make sure that you understood the problem, you have to ask for time to structure your strategy. So consultants are not expected to have a problem. So the client says, how can I increase my profit? And then the consultant is not expected to say, okay, do that, 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 and that. No, first he goes home or to the hotel or to their room. They think a lot about which questions to ask, what models to prepare, and then they go back to the client with questions. So should you do. So don't start asking things and without any structure. Stop and gather your thoughts for a minute. Try to identify the framework and draw it. So consultants always work in a landscape, sorry. So it's like small things, but details make a lot of difference. So they don't work like that, they work like slides. So always draw your framework and your strategy like this. Organize your notes. Don't be messy because they're going to keep your notes. And I've heard of many cases where the consultants who interviewed the candidate were like, should we get him? Should we not get him? And then they took a look at the notes, they said no. It's a mess because they always keep the notes, and if they're kind of insecure or unsure, they're going to look at your notes. So try to be very organized. So the example of framework is the most basic one, profitability framework. Profit is equal revenue minus cost, and you just draw it. If the problem is with the profits, always draw it, and then you start with the case asking questions, as we're going to see next. So, but don't call your structure a framework. Call it the strategy or the structure or anything but framework, because framework is a really bad, it's become a bad word to use. Might sound like you're a robot. Now the fourth commandment is always to be answered first, meaning the problem is like you have to increase profits. The problem, or the profitability has gone down. The causes of this problem could be so many. So what you should do is, let's imagine that this is the cost. So my hypothesis is that the costs have increased and that's why the profit has gone down. And then you start analyzing this hypothesis. So you answer the problem first and then you test, does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, you know cost is not a problem. After you decided what your hypothesis is, you start with the branch of the framework. So if you say, my hypothesis is that, so just to recap here, so if the problem is with the profits, you have three possibilities. Either revenues decreased, costs increased, or both. Then you say, so my hypothesis is that Coke's profit has gone down because of costs. And then you forget the rest of the framework and dig down in costs. Ask everything you want to know about costs. And if you realize it's not a problem, then you just cross it. You're going to see it in the next command. A plus point is to not randomly choose your hypothesis. So let's take costs. If you say, okay, so I know that the price of water has increased and Coke uses a lot of water in their products. So I think it's a reasonable hypothesis to say that the costs increased. Now you use something you know intelligently to choose your hypothesis. It's better than just randomly pick one, right? Now, the structure you started or you laid out is not there for nothing. You have to refer to it. So it doesn't bring anything if you just say, this is a very nice structure, and then you start asking questions here and there randomly. You have to refer to the structure always. Don't jump around branches. So if you're talking about costs, don't ask what was the revenue last year. Right? So keep things isolated in the structure you're using. Consistently explore the branches and exclude them if they're not relevant. So let me show you. I'm going to show you what this means. Summarizing findings is really important. So it's going to be a lot of things you're going to find out, and if you finish your analysis on costs, it's a good time to say, okay, let's recap what we found out. The problems, so we saw that labor costs have increased, raw material costs have increased, now we know that costs are not your problem. So you summarize what you found out. Then you forget costs. Who knows what MISI is?
It's mutually exclusive and comprehensively exhaustive. So that it covers everything but doesn't have any redundancies.
Exactly. First book. So if you want to segment your structure, you're not going to segment like one segment is men and the other segment is people who wear jeans, because there's a lot of men who wear jeans and women that don't wear jeans. So MISI, if you don't know what MISI is, it's worth 5 minutes on Google. Consultants love this, right? So always try to be MISI. Again, the Coke example. So we know that profits have gone down. Our first hypothesis is that costs increased. So now we break down costs. Always the most relevant first. So if you know 1% only of the cost is with marketing, which is not the case, or sugar, then don't put sugar first. Put the biggest ones: raw material, labor, distribution, others. So others is a very good way of being MISI. You're always going to forget something. There's always costs that you never thought of. So if you use others, you do the exhaustive part of the NICE, so you have all costs considered. You can say that your structure is NICE, right? You gain some points if you let the interviewer know that you're like segmenting the whole thing without forgetting anything and without counting things twice. That's another way of putting it. So you asked, starting with the most relevant ones, did the cost for water increase? Sugar? No. Labor? No. You're talking with the interviewer, right? Just doing it more quickly. And then you know, none of the costs have increased. So again, you can segment costs into types, different types, or fixed and variable, right? It's your choice. So in this case, you just segment it into types, categories. So we know that costs are not a problem. Now we refine our hypothesis. So you as interviewee, you're going to say, okay, now I know that my hypothesis that costs increase is wrong. That must mean that revenues decrease. Then you go to the other part of the branch after summarizing what you found out. This is one of the most important commandments, how you gather data. So first thing is segmenting data. This is really crucial. One of the takeaways of the workshop is always segment your data. So for instance, if BMW says they're having problems with revenues, they're selling less cars. So actually what happened is that in Europe, the cars have gone down a lot because people are using more trains or are being more environmentally friendly. But in China, sales have rocketed up. So if you segment revenues by geography in this case, you see what the problem is and you see what the problem is not. Sometimes you have to segment into products. There's one product that we're selling very well, which is very successful, another product is not. Or even sales channels. Like our internet sales for Rewe or for Carrefour is great, but our stores are losing money. So if you don't segment the problem, you're going to do a lot of analysis and you're never going to find out what the breaking point for cracking the case is. You have to ask for data. The interviewer is not going to say, here, if you take revenues last year and this year for this product, you're going to crack the case. It's not going to be that way. You have to get there and ask proactively for the data. And it's not a good idea to say, okay, so do we have any information why the profits have gone down? So that's what you need to find out. You can't ask vague questions like that. So you have to ask revenues last year or how much. Again, how much is very important. So if I say revenues have gone down and just that, it makes a lot of difference if they have gone down 1% or 50%, right? For one of them, the company might be broken, but for the other one, it's just like a minor thing. So always quantify the data you have. Very important also. So our profit is 20%. Is that good or bad? So profitability of 20% might sound good, but if last year it was 30, it means it's a problem, right? Or if last year it was 5%, it means great, we're doing awesome. So we always have to take the perspective of time. How's the trend evolving? Very important also, 20% profit, is that good? It might be terrible if it's, I don't know, if the rest of the industry has 50% of margin, but it might be awesome if it's about supermarkets who usually have like 2% margin. So we always have to compare with the rest of the industry, competitors. So this is more or less the internal, timely component, and this is the external. Closing the case. Now you did all your structure, you asked the right questions, you concluded what the problem is. Like, so we are selling less of Coke, and that's why the profits have gone down. So before, usually the interviewer is going to say, okay, John, so 40 minutes already, or 35, the client has just arrived, the CEO, and he wants to hear from you in 1 minute what you have to recommend, or what your conclusions are. This is the cue for you to close the case. And in order to do that well, you need to take some time. It seems easy, but a lot of people have like huge problems here. So ask for some time to structure your closing. And I'm going to give you some tips about how to do a good closing. They have to be actionable. Can't just recommend like things that they can't implement. So it's about next year making more revenues. And you have to choose a site. So should we launch this new factory in China or not? You can say, I'm not sure, maybe. Choose a site, stand by it, and try to back your conclusion. You can say, what the information I have is not enough to make a final conclusion, but I think that is the right choice, and I still have to take a look at that, and that. Always start with the conclusion first and recommendation, then justify it. So, if the case is, should we launch our shoe, or should we start a factory in China for our shoe company? You have to start with, we should start the factory in China. Not say, okay, so we interviewed 500 million people in China and they all want shoes, and then we saw if the shoes that they like are similar to the ones that we produce, blah, and at the end you say, okay, we should launch the factory again. That's not the right way. The right way, that's what people usually do. 90% of people do. And it took me like 1.5 years to consolidate also and start being more answer first. It's really hard, so you have to practice this. Always say the conclusion and then the reasons and how you got there. Usually three reasons is a good number. It's not too much, but it's not too little also. If you have time, you could Google Barbara Minto, the principle of the pyramid, or pyramid principle. She was the first partner of McKinsey, and this book is really well known. So how to start with what matters and then justify your choice. One last tip, always think aloud. So the only times where you should be silent is at the beginning, when you ask for some time to start your structure, and at the end when you ask for some time to structure your conclusion. But the rest of the time, if you're doing some calculation or thinking about asking or about investigating the Brazilian market, you have to say that aloud, because if you get stuck, well, if you get stuck, you're gonna get there. The interviewer is in a better situation to help you out. Why? Because he has no crystal ball. He can't read your mind. She can't read your mind. And if you're stuck, they're not gonna know how to help you. And they want to help you, in most cases. Sometimes they're bad cops, and they want to see how you deal with stress and bad clients. So it's also client friendly to think a lot. People can follow you. They know where you're heading to. So, plus point if you do that, during the case, ask in a nice and discreet manner if you're heading to the right way. Okay, so do you think this analysis makes sense? Do you think we should first start with revenues and then take a look at costs? The interviewer is not going to say, I don't know. It's your job to find out. They're always going to say, yeah, I think it's, or no, it seems that costs is better. So you can get a lot of cues out of subtle questions like that.